Newly launched Border Management Authority aims to effectively manage the country's borders. President Cyril Ramaphosa launched the authority as South Africa's third law enforcement agency in Musina, Limpopo on Thursday. Dr. Nakampe Masiapato from the Border Management Agency joins me now to unpack the challenges ahead after this launch. Thank you very much, Dr. Masiapato. This is a great pleasure to have you on the show so shortly after the launch. We know that the Border Management Authority's work has already started. You've already been phasing in some of the approaches that you're aiming to take. We know that there are a couple of main functions. One of those is to make movement of persons and goods across borders more efficient, but also to reduce cross-border crime. And to do that, the agency has taken over a number of functions of existing departments. And that requires a lot of integration, a lot of cooperation between yourselves and various departments in order to be successful. Otherwise, there's just going to be confusion and duplication. Has that cooperative working structure been properly established?
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Enli, and we really appreciate the opportunity as the Border Management Authority. Maybe let me start by indicating this point, Henley, that when we talk about the integration in this instance, we are not necessarily talking about an instance where the Border Management Authority will be coordinating various departments at the ports of entry. That is not the essence. The essence is all of those various departments that used to operate at the ports of entry, they exit the environment. So once they've exited the environment, the Border Management Authority then takes over those responsibilities. So effectively what that means is we then have a single authority that is responsible for border law enforcement for the Republic. And in that particular situation, we have a situation where we then appoint a single port commander who is going to be a commander of the Border Management Authority. The departments themselves, they are no longer on the ground, but they still provide directives in terms of any policy changes that the country takes or any kind of a legislative amendment that actually has to happen. So we have already done the integration. As we speak now, the Border Management Authority is operating across the various ports in land, sea, and air, as it were. And therefore, operationally, everything in terms of integration is done. At the top level, we then report to various DGs in terms of the work that we do, and above that, we report to the Interministerial Committee.
That sounds great. Can you tell us about some of the major challenges that lie ahead that you've already identified in getting this work done?
You see, the main challenge, if we can start, for example, within the port of entry itself, because that is the other key area of work for the Border Management Authority. So we had to make sure that we ultimately bring in very critical change management processes with the intention of making sure that we are able to infuse these colleagues who fairly came from different government departments. So our change management activities are underway as we speak with the intention of infusing all of the operations on the port. You will also be aware that because of the fragmentation that was actually the case among various government departments, we had instances where there had been a number of operating procedures that were deployed on the ground. So what we are currently doing is to integrate all of those various procedures and bring them into one so that there is that seamless activities within the port of entry itself from a border management point of view. So those are some of the issues that we are actually doing as we speak. And we know it is not going to be that much easy, primarily because the colleagues had actually worked over time in that fragmented manner. So what we are doing now, we are interfacing them. In the same way we are doing to people, we are also interfacing even the other tools of trade. For example, we have to integrate all of the various systems that the colleagues had been using at the port of entry, which had not necessarily been integrated. So in that way, we are infusing all of those so that there can be a better view in terms of the activities, better statistics, in terms of the activities that are taking place at the port.
It's interesting that corruption is not one of the main challenges that you've mentioned, because many South Africans would say that that's been one of the critical factors that has resulted in us having such porous borders, where cross-border crime is absolutely rife. There's an influx of illegal immigrants into South Africa. Trade is not regulated as it should be. What are you doing about corruption?
Yeah, you see, maybe I just considered that as the basic one. Maybe that's why I then went through into more of your people and then into IT. Indeed, corruption has been one of those critical challenges in as far as border management is concerned. And I think there is a very clear appreciation that the fragmentation itself had effectively facilitated that corruption. Because when colleagues actually operate in a fragmented manner, you then find colleagues from a particular area, whether it's immigration, facilitating people by themselves without necessarily any ground accountability. And that on its own had been causing a problem. So we believe that with the integration that we are currently doing, the first thing that is going to happen is it will then at least assist us to be able to nip any kind of vulnerability of the system that then gave rise to corruption. Secondly, we are putting the integration of the system that I spoke about, and the intention is to have a lot of automation on the ground. Once you have a lot of automation on the ground, then at least it actually closes a lot of vulnerabilities that people could actually explore for the purposes of subverting the system. But in terms of the actual people's integrity, Section 13 of the Border Management Authority Act actually instructs us that we have to vet each and every official that works within the port environment and works for the Border Management Authority. That on its own is going to then allow us to do annual lifestyle audits on the colleagues that operate on the ground. To that extent, we should be able to pick up instances where there is some kind of an outlier which demonstrate anybody living beyond their means. So once that happens, then we are able to then intensify investigative work in that particular context and be able to deal with those vulnerabilities.
There's a vast amount of kilometers, I think over 600 kilometers, you must please correct me if that's incorrect. That's just land borders that the Border Management Authority needs to manage and effectively police as the third armed force after the SANDF and the SAPS. How many personnel do you have to do that physical on-the-ground work, and is it currently sufficient?
Yeah, maybe let me also say, indeed, I started with the port of entry. In terms of the borderline, the Border Management Authority Act indicates that the area of operation for the Border Management Authority is 10 kilometers inland from a internationally recognized borderline, as it were. And our function there actually cuts across all of the various streams that I've indicated. If somebody is to cross into the Republic illegally, obviously that person has broken our immigration laws. We have to then get that person arrested, take that person into the port of entry, get them administrated, get their fingerprints taken, declare them undesirable, that they can't enter the Republic anymore for the next 5 years, even if they try to come back legally. In that instance, we then get them deported. Now, in terms of the issue you're raising, which is about our capacity vis-a-vis the length of the borderline, indeed, if you are to look at the land borderline is 4,700 plus kilometers, and that is a very serious distance. So on that basis, we are working very hard as we speak with various, I would say, partners on the basis of procuring technologies that we are supposed to deploy along the vulnerable segments, in particular on the borderline, so that we can then be able to expand, our footprint through technology. We should be able to monitor across all our borderline to make sure that nobody tries to enter the Republic illegally. You will also note that our work also includes agriculture, meaning that we have to also monitor the movement of animals so that animals don't cross into our jurisdiction out of the formal mechanism and bring sicknesses such as your foot and mouth and anything like that, because those are serious issues that can compromise the country's stability, even from an agriculture point of view. Now, we actually had deployed 221 border guards since last year, the 14th of July. And currently, we actually have the 400 that we have added, and we have also added 50 coastal guards that are going to start going into the coastline to be able to assist. And we know the coastline, again, also is very long. It's 3,900 plus kilometers. So indeed, if you are to look at the numbers that we have, the magnitude of the distance, as well as the work that we have ahead of us, we are very much incapacitated. But we believe as we go along, we should be able to identify those critical vulnerable areas as we have done, and be able to make sure that we put the border guards statically in those areas to make sure that nobody compromises our laws and enter the Republic illegally.
We have unfortunately run out of time. There's so much more to talk about. I think perhaps in the next interview we should talk about economic efficiencies. That's another one of the top priorities in advancing the African continental free trade area. That's one of the elements that President Ramaphosa spoke about a lot at the launch on Thursday. But for now, we are unfortunately going to have to leave it there. We do thank you for your inputs. That was Nakampe Masiapato from the Border Management Agency, giving an update after that launch took place on Thursday.